good. Well, now we're going to make a visit to prehistoric Crete. I'd just like to start by thanking you on part of Christine and myself for the invitation. We're very happy to be taking part here. So we're going to Crete now, prehistoric Crete, with Christine and myself. And we're going to be looking at two different Minoan sites in the early to middle Bronze Age, and you have the dates there to give you the range. As often elsewhere, the roots of traditional archaeology in our field lie in the search for treasure, gold, and also for art to put in museums, and also for pottery, giving information about daily life use, technical skills, and also giving valuable dating frameworks. Recently too, there's been a growing interest in competition, hierarchy, status, perhaps reflecting the norms of our own contemporary society. In the area of religion too, traditional archaeology has looked for models that are familiar to us. So it's been anthropocentric and hierarchical. The search for goddesses or the goddess, although there's no evidence that the very many diverse, small, male, female, and animal figurines were actually thought of as divine. The body and its activities, like dancing, were in traditional archaeology not considered suitable for serious study. The ephemeral and the intangible were unreachable. But since the 1980s, there's been a shift. Peter Warren described Minoan religion as ritual action, and Keith Brannigan wrote a book, Dancing with Death. And more recently, Yanis Hamilaikis has written about archaeology and the senses in relation to Minoan archaeology. And Alan Peatfield and Christine Morris, my co-presenter, who you see there, have also written about the importance of movement and gesture in Minoan ritual, opening up new fields in that area. So what I've done is I've investigated how these ideas relate to the Mesara-type tombs, which are located mostly in South Central Crete, the shaded area there, although there are odd ones in other places, which you can see the little dots around the rest of East Crete. The Mesara plain was and still is a very fertile plain, and at that time it supported small rural communities who had regional get-togethers. And the tombs themselves were circular. You can see in this picture here, there's a circular tomb, and over time, annex rooms were added in the front, and also courtyards, outside areas. In some of the tombs, you can see bottom left there, that curving wall was enclosing an outdoor area for rituals. And they were used for funerary and other rituals, and also there was secondary burial in the rooms outside there in the annexes. Now, there was no written translated language has survived. So archaeologists have had to use their imagination, as here, to reconstruct what went on at the tombs. But one useful source of information, I feel, has been rather neglected, and that is these tiny engraved seals that the Minoans used. You can see how tiny they are by the writing. The seal is on the left, plaster cast on the right. They were for practical and probably amuletic use, and they often show religious scenes. Here, there's a female figure in the center dancing, and on either side, what have been identified as sons. Now we're going to one particular site, Platanos. It's located in South Central Crete on the edge of the Mesara plain. In a big cemetery, this is just one tomb, Platanos B. Like all these tombs, it's circular, and it housed many bodies and their grave goods. As often, it had an annex outside and a special area, here it's paved, in this case, for rituals. But what kind of rituals? Now, the objects found in the tombs give some clues. At the top, you can see cups. People think there were toasting rituals, jugs, lots of jugs. There was eating, drinking, and also the writer for pouring libations. There's a sistrum, lower right, so there were sounds accompanying what they did there. And there in the center, you can see clear evidence of dance, which has largely been under-investigated. For us, dance, in contemporary life, dance is personal in our anthropocentric culture. It's a personal and an interpersonal experience. We dance on our own or with others as a leisure activity, but we cannot colonize the past with our experience. Dancing with the sun, for example, as on this seal, wearing ceremonial costumes, collars, and raising hands in salutation. The recent material turn, which has been mentioned already this morning, has questioned the boundary between humans and non-humans. It suggests that in pre-modern and non-Western societies, there can be a perceived merging between self and other, between humans and other elements, objects, or entities, and has attributed agency to those elements linked in a network of engagement. And so here, the dance engages with the sun. It's not a vertical relationship of worship, it's a horizontal reach toward the sun, of the hand, a rich sensory experience with light and heat, as well as the kinesthetic experience of moving. And the tombs too focus on the sun. When the doorway slabs were removed, they faced dawn at specific times of year, such that the first rays would shine into the tomb and onto the dead inside. Some suggest that this relates to a belief in an afterlife, revival after death, linked to the movements of the sun. Dawn moves along the horizon throughout the year, so there are different specific times, but clusters, particularly in spring and autumn. And our tomb, Platanos B, here, also faced dawn at a very specific date in spring and autumn. This may have been a time for rituals, when the paved area in front was used. So we have special place and now a special time for special activities to happen. Some suggest that circular dance at the circular tombs was intended to imitate and encourage the circular journey of the sun. The tomb door is also often faced towards a mountain, carefully aligned. Mountains are a powerful presence in Crete. At our tomb too, the line of the doorway, there's a yellow ribbon there. Now the tree blocks it now, as often happens for us in our work with alignment. The line goes out, it goes from tomb B over tomb A, and the next slide will show in the distance there, you can see the peak sanctuary site, Mount Coffinus in the distance. This is from outside the tomb, it's the only way you can get past the tree to see it. Here's the same mountain, Coffinus, seen a different angle from a different tomb, also carefully aligned, and here you see it combining with the impact of the rising sun. We've also seen that people dance with plants. Here on an offerings table from Festos. In a ritual context, this is shown. And not only did they dance with plants, but it seemed they actually envisaged becoming plants. Similarly, with birds, dancing as birds, whether in costume or in imagination in an altered state of consciousness. And the same with human-animal hybrids. Anthropology has contrasted our prized individuality with dividuality, the concept that there is the possibility of sharing your being with another element of the natural world, perhaps in an altered state of consciousness. Here, dancing with a goat skull, an item that on other seals is shown being touched with reverence, so evidently holding special significance. From goat skulls to human skulls. We know human bones were handled after death in secondary burial, Pots were sometimes used for burials, but sometimes too the human skull was separated and put in a pot on a plinth, rearranged, stacked, evidently used in transactions that took place at the tombs. The tomb users interacted with the dead and perhaps spoke with them. This old excavation photograph shows, it's from one of the other Mesara-type tombs. It shows what the excavator described as a seated skeleton made from bones from more than one corpse. Bit macabre to our taste, but it was obviously not macabre for them and something they valued and thought was important. Returning to Platanos B, this seal shows purposeful use of set movements. So the left arm is raised and the right arm is down to enter what is evidently an ecstatic state. Rather than being an obstacle to religious experience, the body is here a way to reach it. A challenge to Descartes and Christianity's mind-body split and to our contemporary assumptions. Leaving aside old templates of worship, we see extreme physical experiences suggesting identification with and interactions with different elements of the natural world. To what end? Marty Nissinen's recent comprehensive survey of evidence for prophecy in the ancient Near East, biblical times, and ancient Greek perspectives showed how repeatedly ecstasy, frenzy, trance, or possession were thought to be the source of supernatural knowledge. Any diagnosis or prognosis on personal, medical, social, or spiritual issues belongs under the broad term divination, with inspiration from gods, spirits, and the dead, which could also involve dreams or healing rituals. Is this what we see at these tombs? And what about at the mountains? Over to Christine.
Thank you, Lucy. For the Minoans, the key landscape location for ritual actions and experience were on mountains and in caves, and Crete is rich in both. Material remains, pottery, bronzes, and figurines, purposefully deposited on high mountains and in deep caves, are evidence of this ritual landscape. Bronze Age ritual activity on mountains, usually referred to in Minoan studies as peak sanctuaries, has been known since 1903, when the site of Pet-Sophia was excavated in eastern Crete, and it's marked on the map there. Since then, many more such sites have been discovered and excavated, and I've been involved with this work with my collaborator Alan Peatfield for some 25 years, and in 1989 we excavated a peak sanctuary site of Atsipades in western Crete, also on the map. Location matters. Sites chosen as peak sanctuaries all have localized visual prominence. They are close to local communities, not places of remote pilgrimage. They're also part of a productive economic landscape, herding animals, gathering herbs, and so on, all accentuating the familiarity and accessibility of the landscapes. The most striking objects from these sites are the hand-modelled clay figurines. They're found on the sites in large numbers. Typically, as shown on the slide, they are human or anthropomorphic, mainly in male and female. Some are gender ambiguous. Animals, mainly domesticated, so goat, sheep, pigs, and many bovines, and also votive body parts here on the lower left, arms, legs, torsos, clearly related to healing and indicating one of the roles of these sites. Many of them are small enough to be carried easily to the peak sanctuaries, so that person and object make the journey, walk the path upwards together intimately. The theme today is dance and ritual movement, and so I focus here on the human figurines and the evidence they offer for ritual movement and gesture, especially focusing on gesture. Most of the figurines, as I've said, are gendered clearly as male or female. So here you see male figure, they wear a codpiece or loincloth, some wear little boots, some are provided with daggers at the waist. The women wear bell skirts, high tight top with a high collar and high sweeping hats. all, as the various images on this slide show, have varied hairstyles. And this suggests, in terms of the investment in what was important to the figurine maker and user, that hairstyles were expressive then of role, age, and status. Arm gesture too is the sort of key aspect which shows, if you like, movement and performance, and it's very expressive. The arms may be folded to the chest or to the belly, or lifted up in various ways away from the body. A phrase that Lucy used earlier about not colonizing the past with our modern experience strikes a strong chord here. As objects placed or offered within a ritual space, the figurines are typically described as worshippers or votaries. This, taking through a modern lens, their gestures are described as prayer, as worship. And for a long time, it was assumed that all the varied gestures could be bundled together simply as prayers. This did not invite then further reflection on the body, on experience or performance. Working with the figurines from our excavation, here you see the figurines in situ, and here are strewn or laid out for study, our perspective shifted. By engaging closely with the material, looking for joins, we realized that there were more different gestures, especially of the open type, and those are illustrated on the lower part of the slide. So the arms might be held upwards, be rounded in front of the body, and sometimes too the gestures are asymmetrical. Intriguingly too, more detailed spatial analysis of the figurines, where the figurines had preserved gestures, suggests their distribution across the site is also not random. As shown here, closed arms are strongly clustered in the upper terrace, so here it is on the view of the site, and in the rock clefts, the drop between the two terraces. And the terrace faces east to the lower terrace, where the open gestures are clustered. Is it possible then that this might reflect differentiated ritual activities involving both the figurines and the human actors? And I think that that chimes really well with the very first paper of that idea of an entanglement between the two on different parts of the site. Two different threads of research led us in this work to argue that the figurine postures are not passive prayers, but represent ritual movement and action performed purposefully to enter ecstatic or shamanistic states. Thus, they would make visible to us something of the ritual action, movement, and experience of those participating in peak sanctuary rituals. This thread is a broad comparative one. It takes a speculative leap away from the Minoans. The range and specificity of the gestures suggested to us a level of body knowledge amongst the Minoans that had gone largely unnoticed. Other embodied traditions, for example, shamanistic practices, Indian yoga, Chinese Qigong, indicate that bodily posture and gesture can be used for therapeutic effects, to enter altered states of consciousness, and to elicit various visionary experiences. As one example, we focus on the closed arms to torso gesture here at the lower left. In other traditions, this is associated with vitality and well-being, in other words, healing. Other ritual postures may be linked to other embodied practices, such as auricular activity or with shape-shifting. Lucy identified representations of the melding of humans and non-human animals, even plants, in earlier seal material. The existence then of bodily practices through which such melded and hybrid states could be experienced should not come as a great surprise. The second thread brings us back to the Minoans, with imagery that links the specific peak sanctuary gestures and the figurines with rhythmic ritual movement in a more complex scene. And this comes from a later period, but it's for analogy. This gold seal ring then is from Isopotor in the Knossos area. It shows the Minoan skill in miniaturist art. The ring is just over 2 centimeters in width. 4 female figures, the large figures in flounced dresses, participate in an outdoor scene strewn with flowers. Their rhythmic movement is suggested by the curvature of their skirts. And while translation from static artistic imagery to live action is always challenging, we can see here 3 distinctive types of gestures, all with the arms raised and away from the body. The 2 figures to the left are of particular interest. They're seen in profile here, they raise their arms up and forwards. And you can compare them to some of the Atsipada's figurines. So here on the right, and the arms are raised again up and forwards. And I note the bracelets then on the arms as well. And just chiming with other papers earlier, perhaps they made a sound as well when they moved. A striking feature of this gold ring and others, so these are details of the upper bodies, that all depict ritual activities, is the attenuated or distorted heads. Minoan artists were perfectly capable of creating well-formed human heads in miniature, so the strangely shaped heads are a deliberate choice. I have argued elsewhere that this is an artistic device for representing a trance or ecstatic experience, a method for art to make visible an internally felt or experienced state. Trance participants regularly report the head disappearing, dissolving, transforming into a different hybrid being. And just on the screen there, I put a quote then from a Haitian drumming ceremony, and it emphasizes this idea of heat and experience rising in the head, and sometimes the head splitting open. On the Isopata ring then, the heads of the four female figures are distorted and also framed with dots. Could this locate and communicate the experience of trance? Other puzzling features of many of the rings could make sense through this shamanistic lens. There are floating images, there is an emphasis on flight, and importantly for the theme today, distinctive body postures, which are arguably not frenzied dance, as is often being suggested, but purposeful ritual movements and postures. By paying close attention to the human body in Minoan material, to its movement, to the shapes and forms of the gestures, the interactions with the sun, with animal skulls, with settings at tombs on mountain shrines, we have an opportunity to better understand the nature and importance of ritual movement that is central to Minoan ritual experience. Thank you very much.